we've got about another minute. I'm going to wait just a little bit so that people can get logged in. If you could please take that poll that popped up on your screen, we would greatly appreciate that. Great, we're going to wait another minute or so just to see if we can get anybody else to join us. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. Mute. Hello, everybody. We're at 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We've got some very special guests with us this time around. We've got friends from the Schaumburg Fire Department this week to help us celebrate Fire Prevention Week. We're going to do things a little bit differently this time around. So if you have questions, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A box. We'll answer 1 or 2 questions about each fire if you have them after we discuss them in the presentation, and then we'll be taking questions at the end. So if you could use the Q&A box, that would be really helpful. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Annie Tillman. I'm the Adult Program Coordinator here at the library, and it is my pleasure to introduce Lisa Pizzella. Did I pronounce that right?
Exactly, yes.
Excellent. And she is the Public Education and Information Officer of the Schaumburg Fire Department. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Lisa.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. This is actually the 149th anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire. So most of my job as Public Education Officer of the Schaumburg Fire Department is to teach fire safety, also fall prevention to the community. But I'm very excited about our program tonight because we're going to do a little bit different in that we're going to take a look at the history of famous fires and talk about how those contributed to the improvements in fire safety and fire prevention today. And I'm very excited to introduce our presenter, who is a 4th generation firefighter with 32 years in the Schaumburg Fire Department here. He also was one of the firefighters who responded on September 12th of 2001 to assist in the aftermath of the terrorist attack, the 9/11 terrorist attack in New York City. So he's extremely knowledgeable about fire history, and he's very passionate about fire prevention and education. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Battalion Chief John Schneidwin.
Good evening. I hope everyone is doing well today, and I hope you had a chance to enjoy some of this nice weather. So as Lisa stated, we're going to talk about some tragic fires that happened in the United States and how they've kind of affected education and prevention and how we've actually become safer along the way. So my objectives tonight is to just kind of learn how these tragic fires have changed the world, and show you a little bit about how the fire equipment has changed and a little bit of the impact of how our equipment has made it much easier actually to fight some of these fires, and then to see how prevention has actually changed the world and made it safer. And I hope that we have a little bit of fun along the way here. So if you have any questions after each fire, feel free to ask. So a little bit about me. My name is John. They call me Jack at the firehouse. They call me a couple other names, but Jack is what I usually go by. As Lisa said, I have 32 years with the Schaumburg Fire Department, currently at the rank of Battalion Chief, 4th generation firefighter. So really what that means is that my dad, uncle, and brother were all firemen. My grandfather worked during the Depression, and for his paycheck, he received IOUs from the city that were never paid. And my great-grandfather was actually on the horse and buggies way back when. So I grew up in a family, and I always wanted to be a fireman, which is why I put this little picture here. That's me on the right there. So very excited to be about a fireman. So, you got to have heroes in your life. And my hero has always been my dad. So that's my dad in the middle there. He made a rescue of a little 4-year-old boy. And he worked on the West Side for about 30 years and then got promoted and went into public education and had a huge impact on public education, which is what made me so passionate about it. So one of the impacts that he had is that he helped raise money to build the Chicago Survive Alive house. And what happened there is that in his days on the West Side, fire deaths were about 200 people per year. And so impact of smoke detectors and the education of the Survive Alive house, look what happened to the fire death rate here. So in 1977, it was close to 200. As you see in 1990, the Survive Alive house opened. And then by the time he retired, fire deaths were at 33. So a dramatic decrease in deaths. And that is, really his legacy. And something that I'm proud to be able to talk about, and why I'm so passionate about being able to present about public education and fires, because we really want people to be safe. So where it all began, as Lisa said, 149 years ago, it began with Mrs. O'Leary's cow, or at least that's what we think, right? So the Great Chicago Fire happened. It happened, it's widely regarded as the fire that really started some safety changes. There were a few other ones, but this fire really was prominent. Fire Prevention Week occurs on its anniversary, and again, today is its anniversary. And I don't know, the cow might be innocent. There are some theories out there about that. So a little bit about buildings in 1871. Typically, the fire department had about 2 fires a day. There were about 48,000 buildings that were constructed of brick, about 44,000 that were made of wood, and about 900 that were made of stone and iron. But the summer of 1871 provided some big challenges for the fire department. Number one, it had a 14-week drought, so it was very dry. The fire department was understaffed, and that was kind of a theme that went along there. They certainly had limited building codes back in 1871. I mean, even the sidewalks were made of wood. And between October 4th and October 7th, the fire department had 20 fires. So that was almost twice as many fires as they would normally experience. And a large fire occurred on October 7th, which took a large toll on the firefighters and equipment. Basically, 2 engines were out of service out of the 8 that were there, and the firemen were beat by the time October 8th came along. And October 8th, 1871, the fire started about 9 p.m. And the day consisted of heavy winds, which fanned the fire, and it quickly overloaded the fire suppression efforts. The fire burned for days. As a matter of fact, it burned so long that the firemen really didn't put the fire out. What put it out was it just ran out of fuel. And it took 2 days to be able to survey the property because that's how hot the area was. And interestingly enough, fire departments from Milwaukee and Cincinnati responded. They called it the burnt district. And so they kind of describe it as being 4 miles wide and 4 miles long and 3/4 of a mile wide. So really in Schaumburg terms, we kind of took a map and measured that, and it would be from Plum Grove Road all the way to Barrington Road, and from Schaumburg Road down to Weathersfield. Every building would have been burned out if it was part of the Chicago fire. So that's a pretty dramatic view of how big that fire actually was. 18,000 buildings burned, about 200 million in damage. 1 in 3 lost their buildings, and the fatality ranges are somewhere between 200 and 300. Back in 1871, they really didn't have quite the ability to account for everyone. And so that's why they give a range as opposed to an approximate number. But most people believe it was about 250 people that perished in that fire. But interestingly enough, also on that day, there was a fire. Let's talk a little bit about some of the building codes that changed after the Chicago fire. So streets are wider. They didn't want as many houses next to each other. And if your house was next to another house, it had to be fireproofed. They didn't allow any what they called super tall buildings. Of course, that all changed in the 1900s when we saw skyscrapers. You had to have common walls between buildings, and they must be fireproof. And they reported that each house must have a bucket to help the volunteers extinguish the fire. So here's an example of one of the buckets. And this beautiful building is the Chicago Fire Academy. And that is actually where the Mrs. O'Leary's cow knocked over the lantern on DeKoven Street. So legend has it that her cow started the fire. That really wasn't proven. There are some other theories that that even falling comets may have started the fire. But also on October 8th, 1871, there was a large fire in Wisconsin, Peshtigo, Wisconsin. It was a huge fire. It was much larger than the Chicago fire. It produced hurricane force winds, which created a huge firestorm. It killed between 1,500 and 2,000 people. Imagine that. I mean, that's just so devastating. And it burned about 1.2 million acres. Here's a map of obviously the orange area there that you see is the area that was burned. The town was home to the lumber industry, and so the streets had a lot of sawdust in them, which ignited and fueled the fire. The fire spread to areas of Michigan from Wisconsin. And up until 9/11, Peshtigo was the deadliest US fire in history. It consumed 23 towns. And the reports are that people, there was so much fire around that people actually went to the rivers to escape, and they jumped into the rivers. And as you can imagine, many people perished in the rivers. The fire, they say, was caused by clearing of land or brush, and it was ignited by high winds. So that's what really caused the fire. And a little bit of history of fire apparatus in the 1800s. So they had horse and buggies, which carried or drove around steam engines. And there's just another example of a steam engine. So really, these were engines that were able to put out a little bit of water, but their pressures were nowhere near what we have today. And so obviously they did the best that they could, but they certainly did not have the advantage to having the fire equipment that we have, which is why a lot of the fires in the 1800s became large fires. And so some traditions remain. So back in the horse and buggy days, this is what they called a buggy. And in the fire department, including Schaumburg, we consider this our buggy. That's actually the car that I drive around in, but we don't call it a car, we actually call it a buggy. And today's fire rigs. So this is engine 51, which is at Schaumburg, 950 West Schaumburg. It has the capability of having the ability to pump 1,500 gallons a minute. We have about 2,600 feet of hose on it. It can supply multiple hand lines, much more than a steam engine could. And we literally hook up to Lake Michigan by hooking up to the fire hydrants. So we have a lot of water available to us. Here's a fun little fact. What year do you think the first fire sprinkler system was used in the United States? I can't see any of the answers, but when I first thought of it, I thought it would be maybe 1950. And really it was patented in 1879. So it shows that people were thinking about the importance of fire safety even back in the late 1800s. The next fire we're going to talk about is the Iroquois Theater fire. What a tragic fire this was. It occurred December 30th, 1903. So this was a new building and it was billed as being fireproof. There was a matinee show that started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was filled with many women and children, and it was filled well beyond capacity. Sparks from an arc light ignited a curtain, and they did have some fire protection there. They had these extinguishers that were called kill fire, but what you were supposed to do was throw them into the fire, but this fire started above the ceiling, and therefore these extinguishers were useless. Some stats about this fire: 602 fatalities, the deadliest single building fire in the United States. It happened here in Chicago, and 250 people were injured. A dramatic change happened after this fire. First off, the doors opened inward, meaning that you had to step away from the door to be able to open that door, and you can imagine how difficult it was for people to get out. Also, many of the doors were locked, and therefore people couldn't get out. There was no emergency lighting, And there was a fire protective curtain that was supposed to separate the patrons from the theater people. However, that curtain got stuck on the way down and allowed the fire to actually spread into the auditorium area. Here's a picture, it's kind of hard to see, but this is a picture of how badly burned out that auditorium was. Some fire protection codes that changed after the Iroquois fire were panic hardware. So panic hardware is just hardware that you see every single day in any place where we gather. If you push on the handle, the door opens and they all open outward. Emergency lighting was started to be required back then. So you actually had to have a path that was large enough for people to exit. Also, exit doors had to open outward after this fire. They put occupancy limits on buildings. Occupancy limits are still a challenge for us because we trust that building owners are going to abide by them. And sometimes that does not happen. It does happen in Schaumburg because we send out inspectors, but sometimes there can be an overload of people. But this was the start of occupancy limits. And then they had to have emergency signs. This is an example of some panic hardware. And you're all familiar with this. If you push on that bar, that door is going to open. Even if it's locked from the outside, it has to open from the inside. So the cause of the Iroquois Theater fire was faulty lighting. But the cause of deaths was the inability to exit. And this was a cartoon that was put in a newspaper shortly after the fire. And it really describes exactly what happened in that fire, that these exits were blocked or locked.
Okay, I just want to pause real quick and just wondering if we had any questions before we move on to the next fire. Danny?
We don't have any popping up yet, but if you do have questions, please feel free to put those in there and I can let Jack know as we're going through. If you have any about any of the fires that we've addressed so far, feel free to type those in. And if not, we can keep on going.
Okay. Our next fire is the Our Lady of Angels fire, which happened in Chicago as well. So this fire, what a horrible fire. My father wasn't at this fire, but my uncle was. And the reason my dad wasn't there was because my sister was born the very next day. So he was in the hospital with my mom. But it happened on December 1st, 1958. It happened on Chicago's west side. The school was in session and had about 1,300 kids in school. 92 students and 3 nuns were killed. And it was the worst school fire in U.S. history. And we hope that it remains the worst U.S. fire in U.S. history forever. Such a tragic fire. So some contributing factors to the fire was there were no protected stairwells. What that means is that those stairwells were just open. There were no walls on either side, and or at least on both sides. And so fire was able to run up that stairwell. Well, it actually started in the basement and ran up a stairwell through those unprotected stairwells. And it went to unprotected hallways as well. So there were no fire stops, no doors that closed, got up into the hallways and then spread into the classrooms. There was no fire alarm system, or there was one, but it was antiquated and it wasn't really in, it did not alarm all the students. And the wrong address was initially given. It was given actually, I believe, for the church or the rectory and not for the school. So the firemen were slightly delayed getting there. And extinguishers were mounted about 6 feet off the ground. So children certainly weren't able to get to them, and many of the adults were unable to get to the extinguishers. So some firefighting facts. So 160 kids were rescued. Many were rescued via ground ladders. The second floor was extremely high. It was about 25 feet off the ground because they had an English-style basement. So the second floor was higher than a lot of ladders would reach. Many of our ladders on the engine are 24 feet. And so 25 feet is, too high for even those. More girls than boys were rescued because the firemen would reach into the building and they would actually grab anything that they could, and they were able to grab the boys' belts a little bit earlier, a little bit easier than girls' dresses or skirts. And many children were not tall enough to reach the windows. although some were able to reach the windows and they jumped out, sadly. Some made it and some actually perished because of the jump. Code changes that happened after the Our Lady of Angels fire. So before the Our Lady of Angels fire, there really weren't any codes that made you have fire drills. Some schools had them, but most schools did not. Fire alarm and detection systems were required. Fire drills, yes, back in the 50s, they didn't mandate these drills. And then they had to enclose staircases and enclose hallways, and flammable products could not be used. So a lot of this old school had flammable varnish and things like that helped the spread of the fire. And then the window height and self-closing doors are just a few of the changes that came out of the Our Lady of Angels fire. So a survivor is, doing my research, I found out that a survivor is from a band called Journey. This is Jonathan Kane. He was in second grade when the fire started. And so he wrote this book, and this is a little bit of a song that he wrote for the survivors of the Our Lady of Angels fire. I'd like to share it with you.
The day they became angels, they left us wondering why. Young souls joined God's departed, leaving no time for goodbye. And all that's left are memories of innocence and childhood dreams. As survivors, we choose to love beyond our pain. When the whole world stopped to watch our tears, with faith we heal through the years. Somehow a cloud of sadness still remains.
Pretty sad song, and kind of indicative of how those people felt after surviving that. There was so much pain around that fire. Such a sad, sad fire. Sad day in Chicago history. This is a pretty good book about the Our Lady of Angels fire. As a matter of fact, the description of the firefight in this is pretty descriptive, and I thought it was worth the read. Lisa, do we have any questions?
We have one question, but it's about the 1800s, so we'll take it at the end.
Okay. The MGM fire in Las Vegas, Nevada. That's a pretty impressive fire there. So this occurred on November 20th, 1980. 78 guests died, 7 employees died, 588 injured guests, 25 employees and 14 firefighters were also injured at this massive fire. Here's an example of the people who were hanging out the windows waiting to be rescued. Many of the guests were rescued either via helicopters, ladders, or ropes. 61 deaths occurred on the upper floors as the doors locked in the stairwell. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to another fire about locking stairwells. But 61 people died well away from the fire, so it wasn't the flames that got them. The fire consumed much of the first floor, the casino, and the second floor, and smoke inhalation was the primary killer. There's a picture just of a hallway, just devastated by fire. So Nevada was pretty progressive after this fire, and they mandated that there will be sprinkler systems. Smoke detectors have to occur in all rooms. There has to be smoke detectors in the elevators. Each hotel must have an exit map. So that's that little map that you see when you get off the elevator or in your room. And this was actually groundbreaking in 1981 that they mandated all these changes. A couple more things about the MGM fire. The cause was electrical, and the fire spread due to the lack of sprinklers. And most people who died were not near the fire, as we kind of talked about. It was the smoke that killed them. So really, that happens a lot in fires, that fire does not kill the person or people. What ends up killing people is smoke. And that's why it's so important to have smoke detectors. It's so important to make sure you check them and that you change them out. They're only good for about 7 years. And now the new mandated ordinance that we have in the village of Schaumburg is that we're going to change to 10-year sealed batteries. So you won't be able to change your batteries anymore because you won't have to. These batteries will last for 10 years and then you'll replace the detector. So that's what we'd like to see people move towards. Any questions? All right, we'll move on to the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire, which happened in Southgate, Kentucky. Ended up being a huge fire. Didn't start out that way, but it ended up that way. And this happened on May 28th, 1977. The club was really overcrowded. We kind of talked about occupancy limits before because the performer John Davidson was there. The cause of the fire ends up being a defective aluminum wiring. And the building had lots of updates along the way. There were many additions that happened. So it had kind of a funky design that people had to go from one room to the other. So exits were not so easily planned. They ended up having to have to use the gymnasium as a temporary morgue and where people had to go to identify bodies. Pretty sad. So what happened at this fire is that the staff smelled smoke at around 9:08. A busboy named Walter Bailey had the courage to stop a live musical act, which was warming up John Davidson. And he warned people to get out. He actually stopped the music and said, "You have to get out, there's a fire." And his actions likely saved hundreds of lives. But what happened, and this happens in a lot of places, is that people were warned, but they didn't get out. And so when people started to get out, then everybody moved at one time and people ended up getting trampled. And then other people died when the roof collapsed in on them. There were 168 people that died in this fire. 130 people were injured. And this is kind of an aerial view of the supper club and the devastating building after the fire. And some of the code changes, sprinklers were required in nightclubs that had over 300 people, so that was a new law. And aluminum wiring was banned. An interesting fact, this was the first scene where it was preserved for investigation. And what that really means is that prior to this, the firemen would put the fire out and investigators might come in for a little bit and then they would either bulldoze the scene or move on. But at this fire, they actually made it a crime scene and they preserved the scene so that the investigation could take place and they could actually determine the cause of the fire. Some more fire facts about the Beverly Hills Supper Club. It was caused again by faulty wiring, but many people, as we kind of discussed earlier, were slow to leave after they first heard the notification because they didn't believe it was real. So does this sound familiar? Because it does to me. The first reaction I think that most of us have when we hear a fire alarm is, oh, that it can't be real. And I witness this on a daily basis. Most of the time when I go to a building that has a fire alarm system, not everybody is out of the building. Even though we want people to get out of the building, many people remain, even sometimes when there's smoke in the building. So this is a real problem that we have, and we want people to understand that when the fire alarm goes out, we understand it's inconvenient, but we want to save your life. So we want you to get out. Any questions on the Supper Club fire?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. We'll keep moving along then.
Thank you.
So 69 West Washington, this is a tragic fire that was very well publicized, really a very, very sad fire. So it happened in the Cook County building and it happened on October 17, 2003. So really not that long ago. And it again was the Cook County building. It started in a storage closet. And the fire was so hot that it actually spalled the concrete. What that means is it was so hot that it burned all the water or moisture out of the concrete and cracked the concrete floors. It was a very, very hot fire. And the fire attack was started via the stairwells, of course, because that's how we put a fire out. We have to climb up the stairs, and then when they got to the stairwell where the fire was, they opened the door, and when they opened the door, smoke traveled up the stairwell. And smoke traveled up the same stairwells that people were coming down. And what ended up happening is that the doors were locked in this building because of security reasons. So this was, I'm not sure exactly how tall this building was. I want to say it was about 60 stories. So people were in this building, the doors were locked as they were coming down the stairs, and smoke was filling up the hallways, and they tried to get in the doors of the different floors, but all the doors were locked, and subsequently 6 people died in stairwells. That really needless, absolutely needless that they died in these stairwells. So, and dozens were of course injured. So some code changes that happened, Schaumburg was very quick to act on this. So immediately after this fire, I think it was probably within 2 months, Schaumburg enacted an ordinance that we would have all the locks open whenever there was an activation of a fire alarm in a building. So you're allowed to have security, the building can be secured, but in any high-rise building, once that fire alarm activates, those doors have to drop open and release the locks, and so no one will be stuck in a stairwell ever again, certainly not in Schaumburg. And so one of the things that Lisa does is, and I used to do, is we do these little fire evacuation drills at high rises. And during these fire evacuation drills, one of our jobs is to check the doors to make sure that the dropouts actually work and that the doors unlock. And if the doors don't unlock because there's some type of malfunction, then we make sure that the building fixes it, and then we come back out and check them again. So we're really very proactive in making sure that these dropouts work. And all stairwells, as part of the fire attack, are going to be checked. So we had a fire shortly after that in one of the high rises. It was a residential building, and we checked that stairwell 4 times before we left. So we wanted to make sure that it was checked, you know, right as soon as we got there. Shortly after, we had the fire under control, and then throughout the fire, we made sure that there was no one stuck in those stairwells. Any questions about 69 West Washington? All right, going to go on to a really tragic fire in West Warwick, Rhode Island. So this is the Station nightclub fire. It happened February 20th, 2003. So again, not that long ago. And 100 people were killed. The band Great White was playing there. And so it drew a great deal of interest, and many people were there. 230 people were injured. And it actually started because of pyrotechnics. So they actually lit off fireworks to try and, you know, get the crowd going. And as soon as they lit off those fireworks, it ignited an acoustic ceiling. And we're going to show you a little video of that. I'd like you to pay attention to what happens here. When the fireworks starts, you're going to see the ceiling tiles start to ignite. And I want you to watch the crowd. So although there were like 4 or more exits, the people all went out the same exit that they came in. And then a stampede sort of ensued, and you see the people become a little bit more hysterical as they realize the danger that's happening here. So, and this was the 4th deadliest fire in U.S. history. So take a look at how it starts, and then we're only going to run a minute of this, minute and a half of this, and you're really going to see what happens with this smoke, and watch the travel of that smoke and how. So that fire spread so quickly and so needlessly, really, because they didn't have sprinklers in there, and really they shouldn't have obviously been shooting fireworks off inside a building, but they did. And had this building had sprinklers, there would have been a whole different story. So here's a reenactment of the club and what would have happened had they had sprinklers. I'm sorry, this is a non-sprinklered room, so we're going to show two videos of this. So you're going to see how quickly this fire spreads, and then we're going to show another video that has with sprinklers. So we're 25 seconds in, and look at the smoke that's being produced right there. It's pretty accurate smoke, and it's going to get worse. So we're just at 1 minute, and you see that, the fire department probably isn't even dispatched yet, and look at the advancement of this fire. Look at how that smoke starts to bank down. And so you can see that if you're standing now and you are enveloped in smoke. So that's a pretty dramatic look at what a fire is like and how smoke actually kills you there. Our next video is actually one with sprinklers, and watch the difference that happens with the smoke and the fire with this. So there's the first sprinkler going off at 27 seconds. And watch how quickly this fire is controlled and what happens to the smoke. A lot less smoke, obviously, because the fire is under control for the most part. And so had they had sprinklers at this fire, there would have been maybe no deaths. So that's how dramatic a difference sprinklers can make. What you're seeing here now is a lot of steam mixed with some smoke. So still not a great atmosphere, but much better than the acrid smoke that people were breathing at that fire. So any questions about the Station nightclub?
None yet.
Okay, we're going to keep going along here. So, we've talked a little bit about fire prevention. We've talked a lot about fires. The next fire that I'm going to show you is, we've talked about, the Our Lady of Angels and rescuing people. This next video is actually from the Paxton Hotel fire. I'll admit that it's not a great video in terms of it was shot by an amateur and it's kind of difficult to see. But what I really want you to watch is how hard it is to make a rescue, number one, and how hard it is for the victim who is being rescued. This was a very tragic fire, and we're not going to go too deep into this fire. My dad was at this fire, but 19 people perished in this single room occupancy. And just watch how hard it is to make a rescue via a ladder, and really how scary it must be for the people being rescued. There's actually a person in there waiting to be rescued. More up top there. If you watch the firefighter to the left here as he tries to make this rescue, and he does make this rescue, it's really shows you how hard it is and how hard the and how scared the people are when they're trying to get on a ladder. The reason they're going above that person to the right there is because they have more people that are in more peril on the third or fourth floor. That's why they bypass that one and they come back and get him. That smoke is pouring out the window to the left there where they're trying to rescue this person. Look at how difficult this is to do. So really just a short clip of this this fire, but amazingly difficult to rescue somebody via ladder. It seems like it would be easy. It seems like it would be like no big deal, but you know, you saw the first person come down the ladder. That was no problem. If we can get people to cooperate that way, but if we have somebody that is unsteady or scared, a ladder rescue is it's a lot of work. Any questions on that? No? Well, one of our themes this year is cooking fire. So I just want to talk briefly about cooking fire. So the NFPA says that kitchen fires are the leading cause of home fires. So they cause about 49% of all fires reported in residences. 21% of the times these fires lead to deaths. That's a pretty scary number. So, you know, that's a pretty high number. And 41% of the time they lead to injuries. So what I have seen happen is I've seen cooktop fires like the one that's on the screen here. I've also seen people fall asleep with pizza ovens in the pizzas in the oven, and the pizzas burn up, and then the oven catches fire and fills the unit with smoke, and then sometimes the fire spread. Kitchen fires are pretty dangerous. So one of the other things that we have seen is that people tend to store pots and pans, or sometimes they'll even put plasticware inside the oven, and then they forget about it, and then they turn the oven on, and pretty soon their oven's on fire. So one way that we combat grease fires is you can put a lid on it. You can use salt, but we never ever want to put water on any grease fire. Any questions on kitchen fires? All right. So we got the holidays are coming up. I know it didn't feel like that today, but I want to show you how quickly a Christmas tree can catch fire. So this is a real Christmas tree, and the caveat to this is they didn't water it. So this is a pretty dried out Christmas tree, but it's pretty dramatic to see how quickly this fire spreads. And again, watch the smoke volume here and see, number one, if your smoke detector were to go off, would you be able to get out of your house this quickly? And then think about that it takes the Schaumburg Fire Department about 4 to 6 minutes on average to get to a home. And look at how far advanced this fire is when, you know, in a very short period of time. So let's take a look at it.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
That's 15 seconds in right there. Look at the volume of fire and smoke coming out of there. 45 seconds to get that big and to spread that much smoke. So think about that in your home and think about how quickly the things around it ignited, and think about making sure that you have smoke detectors. And we'll talk a little bit more about smoke detectors in a little bit, but just think about having a plan to get out. What if that was in your living room right by your stairs? Would you be able to have a way to get out? Do you know how to get out the second floor? Just a question, kind of a rhetorical question, but that's a pretty hot fire, obviously. Do you think it would be pretty hot on the second floor? Definitely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about today's fire versus the 1960s fires. So furniture is basically, you know, we say that it's basically that we sit on comfortable gasoline. That's what we describe it in the fire service. Everything that we have is made of petroleum for the most part. If it's not made of wood, then it's made of petroleum. And petroleum burns very fast. It produces a very acrid smoke. And we're going to see the difference. I'm going to show you a video of what it was like of the same fire catching a couch from 1960 to one of today's manufacturing. Just look at the difference here. So they basically take a flare, they put the flare on the couch, and we'll see how it ignites here in about 10 seconds. If you see the modern room, it's kind of hard to see, but we're already starting to see some smoke start to be produced in the modern room. And we see a little bit of flame in the legacy room. So you would think with the flame that the legacy room would be going up in smoke pretty quickly. So we're about 1 minute and 15 seconds in. They look to be about the same fire height right here, but look at the smoke that's being produced in the modern room as opposed to the legacy room. And now watch this fire start to take off here. So this fire starts to advance, and it's going to start to grow. Fire typically will grow about twice the size every minute, but watch how this fire has become much more violent than the fire in the legacy room. And you see the smoke that's coming out of that modern room now would definitely be activating smoke detectors, which is why we want to make sure that you have smoke detectors. Because you can still get out at this point, but in about another 30 seconds, it's going to be very difficult to get out of anywhere near that modern room. Again, you know, we talk about smoke detectors, but we also advocate for sprinklers, because a sprinkler would put this fire out right away. But we definitely want to make sure that people have smoke detectors and check them and make sure that they're safe. Look at the smoke that's coming out of that modern room. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So I will tell you that we're about 3/4 of the way to your house at this point, and look at the volume of smoke. So the fire is starting to consume almost the entire room. And when it consumes the entire room, we call that flashover. And that's going to occur very shortly here. Flashover means that the temperatures are so hot nobody could survive them, and you can see why. So same furniture, same room, and look at the volume of fire that we have in the modern room as opposed to the legacy room. So this is why we say fires are far more deadly today than they were back in my dad's era. There were more of them back in my dad's era, but they're far more deadly today than they were back then because the plastics and the petroleum-based products that we have. So look at that fire. Total time to flash over 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Most fire departments won't be on the scene even if you call them immediately, because it usually takes between 4 and 6 minutes again to get there. So it's why it's so important to make sure that we have firehouses where they're supposed to be, and that we have you guys making sure that you have your smoke detectors, if you have sprinkler systems. And of course, if once you hear that smoke detector go off, get out of the house and stay out. And please don't go back for anything. So a couple fire prevention things. So fire prevention and education have been a vital part of any progressive fire department for quite a while. It's probably the smallest part of the budget of the fire department, to be honest, but it is a very important segment of the fire department because we want people to be aware of what causes fires and how they can prevent them from happening. And, when we do that, as we saw in my dad's case, that the numbers go way down. And so education is really the key to our future. And we've seen how codes have changed over the years and how they actually prevent significant damage. So we've looked at things that have happened from doors being locked at the Iroquois Theater and how we have panic hardware now, or the fire codes that were established after the Our Lady of Angels fire. They've all made us safer. And those are things that continue to happen. Unfortunately, code changes usually only happen after a big event. So, you have a big event that happens and it's catastrophic, and then there's an outcry for people to make change. A lot of times there's resistance to that change, though, and that resistance is because, to make things a little fire safer, it costs money, and that's just a reality. And one example of that is sprinklers. So the city of Chicago had a huge battle with building owners because they did not want to retrofit their buildings with sprinklers. And, it went on for years and years, and still many are not retrofitted with it. And it all comes down to dollars. But the reality is that we want people to be safe. And so in Schaumburg, we've retrofitted all of our buildings. So it's remarkable what a difference it makes, though, in fire suppression and life safety when we have sprinkler systems. And so new codes, as we just talked about, they make our life safer all over. Some closing thoughts that I have. So, we've shared a lot about tragic fires and the impact that they've had on codes and really how they've impacted our lives. And they've made a difference everywhere. I could talk about this all night if you really wanted to. We could go into different fires and even 9/11, how that impacted fire safety codes and how we're really moving to make things safer. But we kind of talked about things. We've talked about things that impact our lives: schools, hotels, dining venues, nightclubs, high rises, and even some general home safety tips. So one thing with fire prevention is we really want to make sure that we hammer this message home. We want you to have smoke detectors. Most people, it's commonplace now. When I was growing up, it certainly wasn't commonplace. I remember when the first ones came out. But smoke detectors should be in every bedroom and on each floor. So, and we'd also like you to sleep with your bedroom doors closed. And the reason for that is you saw the rapid movement of smoke. And if we can control that smoke movement, we can often have a fire in one room and people can survive in different rooms for an extended period of time if the doors are closed. But detection is a major component of this. So we want to make sure people have smoke detectors and they check them and they make sure that they work. If you have some of the older styles, please check the batteries and replace them. We used to talk about having moving our clocks forward or backwards, that we would replace our batteries. If you have older style ones, please replace the batteries or consider replacing the detectors. CO detectors, so carbon monoxide detectors, they should be within 15 feet of the sleeping quarters. I often chuckle when I hear people say, oh, my carbon monoxide detector is in my furnace room in the basement. That's not a bad place for it to be for a second one, but it's not where we want the first one to be. We want them within 15 feet of the sleeping quarters, because if CO is in your house, we want it to wake up you, not your furnace. So please make sure that you check your CO detectors and that you have them within 15 feet of your bedrooms. In electrical, any electrical work that you do should be done with an electrician. And also, please don't overload extension cords. Extension cords, we also see fires that are caused because extension cords are run underneath carpeting or throw rugs, and so they wear down the resistance in there, and fires can be started from that. And so please don't overload extension cords, especially with the holidays coming up. We know people want to have lights, and LEDs use far less electricity, so that's one very good thing that's changed with electrical. And you should have a safety plan. You should talk about the safety plan with your family or whoever you lived with, and you want to make sure that you have an exit drill in the home. So if you had a Christmas tree fire on the first floor, how would you get out if the stairwell was blocked? Would you go to your windows? Would you be able to use a throw ladder from a window? Would you be able to exit your window onto a roof? Those are all things that we don't know, but that you can determine by doing an exit drill in the home. And really, I want you to stay safe and stay healthy. And I did a little bit of research, and one of the things that Jonathan Kane said, the survivor from the Our Lady of Angels fire and from the band Journey, what he said is, the fire shook my faith as an 8-year-old child. But when I look back, I see the thread of redemption. That tragedy forever changed fire codes around the world, saving countless lives. So, really, when we think about that, isn't that really what we were talking about with the code changes? These tragedies happen, and we don't want them to go in vain. We want these changes to be implemented, and we want people to stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you so much, Jack. We do have a couple of questions, but if you have any more, folks, please feel free to put those in the Q&A or the chat at this point. So our first question is, what fire protection gear did firefighters wear in the 1880s?
That's a great question. I don't really know everything that they wore, but they didn't have a lot of protection. They even didn't have a lot of protection in the 60s. They basically had helmets and they wore flannel shirts, but they did not have the equipment that we currently have. So really very, very limited fire safety gear back then. Basically just helmets, and the helmets were leather, which were a strong part of the fire history. Which, still some firemen prefer to wear leather helmets. But I can tell you all the way through my dad's era, the gear changed, and it wasn't very safe until recently.
Our next question is about any special standards or regulations for churches.
That's a good question. There are regulations for churches. It depends on when they're built. And so unfortunately, I don't have a great grasp on everything that's required for churches. Certainly in Schaumburg, you need to have a detection system. If they should have a sprinkler system. They should have automatic closing doors. But I'm afraid I'm not an expert on churches. Lisa, do you have anything to add on that?
No, that's a good question. But it's obviously there's going to be occupancy limits and everything too that you'd find in those buildings where people are going to congregate.
Right.
Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to type, so I'll give folks a moment if you have any additional questions.
I just wanted to add one more thing. One of the big things we talk about in fire safety is what we call crawl low and go. And I think a lot of those videos showed a good example of why it's so important if you were in a smoky room that you want to get low and get out as quickly as you can. So when I teach the kids fire safety, that's definitely something we stress, to crawl low and go, because that's where the air is going to be the coolest and the cleanest. So whenever you find yourself in that situation, again, like Chief Schneidwin said, people aren't dying necessarily from the flames, but from the smoke. So you want to get down low where the air is the cleanest.
Really good point. I know we were talking about cooking fires, and that's kind of the theme of this year's one. If you're cooking and there's not a fire, but your smoke detector goes off, what should you do?
So your smoke detector goes off and there's not a fire?
It's just smoke in the air from...
So first thing you want to do is you want to want to remove the heat. So turn the heat off, cover the pan if you can. This happens frequently when I cook, so I know about this. So, but basically you're going to have to get the food away from the heat, and the best thing you can do is cover it, and then you can, shut the heat off, and you can bring the pan outside if it's not too dangerous. If it's on fire, I don't want you to do that. I just want you to cover it. And then, of course, if the smoke detector is going off, we want you to get out of the house and call 911.
If it's just smoke, and you would want to, it's not fire, you ventilate. And a lot of smoke alarms have hush buttons that you can press. Certainly the newer ones, certainly the 10-year models will. So rather than taking out the batteries or taking down the alarm, we'd much rather you hush it. It will go out, it'll silence for up to 15 minutes. And please, that's a problem. Some people, if they get a lot of smoke when they cook, they'll take the batteries out, and that's unfortunately then that's not going to be ready in case of a real fire. So if you don't want your smoke alarm to be within 10 feet of your stove. So if it's too close, then it's going to go off too frequently. So we want to make sure they're always ready. So keep those batteries in there so they'll be ready just in case.
Excellent. We don't have any more patron questions, but I wanted to thank you both for coming and teaching us all about fire safety and the history of devastating fires in the US. That was really fascinating.
Thank you very much for hosting.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Definitely. Thank you all for coming. Have a great